Hello, good evening. Welcome to a live reading of The Vampyre by John Polidori, written circa 1816. This book is in the public domain. Now, first of all, what we're going to have to do is have a little bit of backstory to it. This was anonymously, quote unquote, given to a publisher in 1819. It was basically taken from John Polidori, who was an Italian doctor who was palling around with Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley in Claremont in the summer of 1816 in the I can never pronounce it, Diarartine. Anyway, it was considered the year without summer. It was abysmally rainy, and they stayed inside the villa quite a bit. So what they did was they decided to one night to have a ghost story writing contest. And this is when Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein, and Byron came up with a couple of things. And one of them was a fragment about someone who dies and is buried, but he never finishes it. He got bored with it, and he just said, never mind, I'm not going to finish it. Well, Polidori became disenchanted with Byron at some point in their relationship, maybe when Byron made him walk all the way home to Italy from Switzerland. That might be it, I'm guessing. Basically, what ended up happening was Polidori, hi, Larry. Polidori took the fragment that Byron had written and he expanded on it and made what is probably now the what we would consider the beginning of modern vampire fiction. Before that, it had all been zombie-like and revenants and such as that. So what we're going to hear, first of all, is the letter that accompanied the manuscript that was sent in to the publisher in 1819. And we are going to start with that. And let me get the mood set. Okay, going to have a little ambient music in the background that's fitting. Extract from Geneva. Part of a letter. I breathe freely in the neighborhood of this lake. The ground upon which I tread has been subdued from the earliest ages. The principal objects which immediately strike my eye bring to my recollection scenes in which man acted the hero and was the chief object of interest. Not to look back to earlier times of battles and sieges, here is the bust of Rousseau. Here is a house with an inscription denoting that the Genevan philosopher first drew breath under its roof. A little out of this town is Ferney, the residence of Voltaire, where what wonderful and certainly in many respects contemptible character received, like the hermits of old, the visits of pilgrims, not only from his own nation, but from the farthest boundaries of Europe. Here too is Bonnet's abode, and a few steps beyond, the house of that astonishing woman, Madame de Staël, perhaps the first of her sex, who has really proved it is often claimed equality with noble men. We before had women who have written interesting novels and poems in which their tact at observing drawing-room characters have availed them. But never since the days of Heloise have those faculties which are peculiar to man been developed as the possible inheritance of woman. Though even here, as in the case of Heloise, our sex have not been backward in alleging the existence of the Abelard in the person of M. Schlegel as the inspirer of her works. But to proceed upon the same side of the lake, Gibbon, Bonnivard, Bradshaw, and others mark, as it were, the stages of our progress. Well, upon the other side there is one house, built by Diodati, the friend of Milton, which has contained within its walls for several months that poet who we often read together, and who, if human passions remain the same, and human feelings like chords on being swept by nature's impulses shall vibrate as before, will be placed by posterity in the first rank of our English poets. You must have heard or read the third canto of Childe Harold will have informed you that Lord Byron resided many months in this neighborhood. I went with some friends a few days ago after having seen Ferney to view this mansion. I trod the floors with the dwelling with the same feelings of awe and respect as we did together those of Shakespeare's dwelling at Stratford. I sat down in a chair of the salon and satisfied myself that I was resting on what he had made his constant seat. I found a servant there who had lived with him. She, however, gave me but little information. She pointed out his bedchamber upon the same level as the salon and dining room, and informed me that he had retired to rest at 3, got up at 2 a.m., and employed himself a long time over his toilet. I think that's probably he went to bed at 3 a.m. and got up at 2 p.m., and employed himself a long time over his toilet. That he never went to sleep without a pair of pistols and daggers by his side, and that he never ate animal food, ever. He apparently spent part of every day upon the lake in an English boat. There is a balcony from the salon which looks upon the lake and the mountain Jura, and I imagine that it must have been hence he contemplated the storm so magnificently described in the third canto of Childe Harold. For you have from here a most extensive view of all the points he has herein depicted. I can fancy him like the scathed pine, whilst all around was sunk to repose, still waking to observe what gave but a weak image of the storms which had desolated his own breast. And here we have a poem that's part of Childe Harold. It's an excerpt, if I'm not mistaken. And I have Childe Harold. I actually have a first edition of Childe Harold here in my collection. So I could double check this, but I'll just go ahead and go with it because I'm pretty sure that's what it is. The sky is changed, and such a change, O night, and storm and darkness, you are wondrous strong, yet lovely in your strength, as is the light of a dark eye in a woman. Far along from peak to peak, the rattling crags among, leaps the leer thunder, not from one lone cloud, but every mountain now hath found a tongue, and your answers through misty shroud, back to the joyous Alps who call out to her aloud. And this is in the night, most glorious night, thou were not sent for slumber. Let me be a sharer in thy far and fierce delight, a portion of the tempest and me. How the lit lakes shine, a phosphoric sea, and the big rain comet dancing to earth, and now again 'tis black, and now the glee of the loud hills shake with mountains' mirth, as if they did rejoice over a young earthquake's birth. Now where the swift Rhine cleaves his way between heights which appear as lovers have parted, and haste, whose mining depths so intervene, that they can meet no more, though broken-hearted. Though in their souls, which thus each thwarted, love was the very root of fond rage, which blighted their life's bloom, and then departed, itself expired, but leaving them an age of years all winter, war within themselves to rage. I went down to the little port, if I may use the expression, wherein his vessel used to lay, and conversed with the cottager who had the care of it. You may smile, but I have pleasure in thus helping my personification of the individual I admire, Lord Byron, by attaining to the knowledge of those circumstances which were daily around him. I have made numerous inquiries in town concerning him, but can learn nothing. He only went to society there once, when M. Pictet took him to the house of a lady to spend the evening. They say he's a very singular man, and seem to think him very uncivil. Amongst other things they relate, that having invited M. Pictet and Bonstetten to dinner, He went to the lake to chill. He went on the lake to Chillon, leaving a gentleman who traveled with him to receive them and make his apologies. Another evening, being invited to the house of Lady, and it's redacted here, Lady D.H., he promised to attend, but upon approaching the windows of her ladyship's villa and perceiving the room to be full of company, he set down his friend, desiring him to plead his excuse, and immediately returned home. Now, I'm guessing this letter, which is written anonymously, is actually written by Polidori, and I'm guessing the friend and all this stuff is Polidori, because Byron treated Polidori very much like a lapdog, very badly indeed. Or it could have been his best friend, but I don't think his best friend, who I can mention in another, I don't think his one very close friend was with him at the villa in Switzerland. So I'm going to guess that it was Polidori who was with him the whole time. So he set down his friend, desiring him to plead his excuse, and immediately returned home. This will serve as a contradiction to the report which you tell me is current in England of his having been avoided by his countrymen on the continent. The case happens to be directly the reverse, as he has been generally sought by them, though on most occasions apparently without success. It is said indeed that upon paying his first visit at Coppet, following the servant who had announced his name, he was surprised to meet a lady carried out fainting. But before he had been seated many minutes, the same lady, who had been so affected at the sound of his name, returned and conversed with him a considerable time. Such is the female curiosity and affectation. He visited Coppet frequently, and of course associated there with several of his countrymen, who evinced no reluctance to meet him, whom his enemies alone would represent as an outcast. Now, Byron, I have to get a little bit more into Byron here. I studied Byron. I adore Byron. I would have never put up with Byron. He was a jerk. But I think it's really, really, really important to understand in the context of all this that he was in my opinion, original huge celebrity. He was huge. I mean, he was incredibly famous. Women sent him locks of their nether region hair. They threw themselves at him. They went crazy. They fainted at the sound of his name. There were rumors about him. Carolyn Lamb, a lot of people think that Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know is about Jim Morrison. It's not. Lady Carolyn Lamb actually uttered that phrase, or put that phrase in Glenarvan, which is also supposed to be based on Lord Byron, who also has a Lord Ruthven in it. She basically just continued Polidori's slamming, if you will, of Byron by calling her character Lord Ruthven, and the vampire, and this is called Lord Ruthven. But Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know was actually written by her about Lord Byron. I would say, though, that Jim Morrison, as far as I can tell, is probably the closest thing that pop culture has ever had to another Lord Byron, in my opinion. You know, it's I've not studied Morrison as much as some people have. Living in LA, I feel like I've gotten to know a little bit more about him. My mother worked on the Sunset Strip. It was very beautiful. She'd met him several times. I've met other people that have met him. Morrison actually, I think he was the closest thing to Lord Byron. And I'm not a huge Morrison fan. He kind of frightens me in some ways. And I'm sure Lord Byron would too if I was actually a little closer to him in time. But Byron was infamous. He was infamous. He supposedly slept with his half-sister. He made women crazy. He never ate or drank any kind of animal product. As a matter of fact, when he was in public, and this is it's interesting because a lot of what is attributed to Saint Germain, if you watch my Saint Germain video, people are mixing up the Lord Byron legend with Saint Germain, because Lord Byron also, or was the one. He either, in addition to Saint Germain, or was the one that did it, and the legends are getting mixed up because he was so notorious. He supposedly only ate boiled potatoes and drank vinegar in the presence of other people, which, if I'm recalling correctly, when Saint Germain was supposedly not a vampire, that was his diet as well. But then when he supposedly became a vampire, no one ever saw him eat or drink anything. So that's really interesting that the two of them have kind of, I mean, to I can't even stress enough what a pop culture icon he was back then. He was it. He was huge. He was just absolutely huge. And even to this day, he is in a lot of ways, especially to certain artists like David Bowie for the Blue Jean videos. He did a short version video and a long version, which I highly recommend you find, called, and the character was Screaming Lord Byron, and the costume is basically a living depiction of a very, very famous portrait of Lord Byron. So this is just an aside, but it's just so critical to understanding this particular book, to put it in context of what a social icon Byron was, and what, like, he was just an enigma too. I mean, he was mad, bad, and mad, bad, and dangerous to know. So that pretty much says it all. Okay, so back to the letter. It's the introduction of this book. So he visited Coppet frequently, and of course associated there with several of his countrymen who evinced no reluctance to meet him, whom his enemies alone would represent as an outcast. Though I've been so unsuccessful in this town, I've been more fortunate in my inquiries elsewhere. There is a society 3 or 4 miles from Geneva, the center of which is the Countess of Bruce, a Russian lady, well acquainted with the agremens of de la Société, and who has collected them round herself at her mansion. It was chiefly there that I find that the gentleman who traveled with Lord Byron as a physician sought for society. Now, this is John Polidori. He was the physician. He used almost every day to cross the lake by himself in one of their flat-bottomed boats, and return after passing the evening with his friends about 11 or 12 at night, often whilst the storms were raging in the circling summits of the mountains around. I don't know. I wish I would have gotten. I just like doing this live because it's fun, and I'm hoping the chat will interact with me a little bit and ask questions. But the Swiss Alps, I mean, one of the most beautiful views I've ever seen, this is not in the letter, this is me speaking, is the actual view going up Lake Como to one of the parts of, like, the ports. It's almost like Venice, where you've got Lake Como is the whole lake, and then you've got the little tiny villages or neighborhoods that your boat goes on. And I was visiting one of my friends who has an amazing villa on Lake Como. And I just remember, and I'd never been before, and I remember being on the little ferry that takes you up Lake Como and the Alps, and just it was the most beautiful view I've ever seen in my life. I highly recommend Googling images of Lake Como and the villas, and it was just Lake Como to me is the most beautiful place in the world. So that was when he's referring to mountains, he's referring to the Alps, because Lake Como is, literally, I'm pretty sure that in The Sound of Music, that's where they walked across into Italy to get away from the Nazis. So you can easily walk. So you're looking at the Swiss Alps. Well, you can't easily walk. That's kind of a silly thing for me to say, but you can walk it. So, especially in the springtime or the summertime. So, Larry, are you enjoying this, I hope? So, as he became intimate from long acquaintance with several of the families in this neighborhood, I have gathered from their accounts some excellent traits of his lordship's character, which I will relate to you at some further opportunity. I must, however, free him from one imputation attached to him, of having in his house two sisters as the partakers of his revels. This, like many other charges which have been brought against his lordship, is entirely destitute of truth. His only companion was the physician, which I have mentioned already. The report originated from the following circumstance. Mr. Pierce Shelley, I'm sorry, why did I just mess that up, y'all? Percy Shelley's my favorite. I just messed that up. Uh, Mr. Percy Bysshe Shelley, a gentleman well known for extravagance of doctrine and for his daring in their profession, even to sign himself with the title of Atheos in the album of Chamonix, having taken a house below in which he resided with Miss M.W. Godwin and Miss Claremont, the daughters of the celebrated Mr. Godwin. There were frequently visitors at Diodati, and often were seen upon the lake with his lordship, which gave rise to the report, the truth of which here is positively denied. Okay, so this is interesting. This is another reason I think it's Polidori writing this letter and not some countess, because Mary Shelley and Claire Claremont most definitely stayed in the villa with Byron. There's no way around that. Percy Shelley stayed there too. Claire Claremont was sleeping with um, Byron, became pregnant with Byron, lost a child with Byron. It just, it, she was definitely there. They were there. There's just no way around that. I don't know if Polidori is trying to. I think Polidori was obsessed with Byron. I think he was in love with him. I think there was unrequited love there. And I think what he's trying to do is make it seem like only he and Byron were residing in the villa at that time. But that is absolutely not true. Now, of course, this being written in 1819, he had no way of knowing that Mary Shelley's diary would later be published. And there's several books that in my next clip, because there's no way I'll finish all of this tonight, but in the next live I do reading, a little sip of tea there to wet my throat, I will give you, I'll attach a list of reading on this. The Summer of Monsters is one of my favorites, but Mary Shelley's diary is published, and they most definitely stayed there. So, among other things which the lady from whom I procured these anecdotes related to me, she mentioned the outline of a ghost story by Lord Byron. It appears that one evening, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and the two ladies and the gentleman before alluded to, the physician, after having paused a German work, which was titled Phantasmagoriana. Now, there were a lot of, again, this is me citing, there were a lot of the monk. Oh gosh, there were so many. What was the one with the? Oh gosh, I can't think of them right now, and I've read them all. But there were several. At this point, this is one of, in my opinion, one of the grand periods of Gothic fiction. Gothic, over the top, just ridiculously amazing horror fiction, just beautifully written. If you're into Jane Austen at all, Northanger Abbey, Catherine in Northanger Abbey is reading a lot of it. And that's what a lot of her problem comes from, because she tends to run off in a fantasy world from these Gothic novels. So they're a lot of fun. I've read them all. One starts with O, and I can't remember it right off the top of my head. But I'm sure you can look them up, but they were pretty fascinating. Anyway, Phantasmagoriana was a German one, and they began relating ghost stories to each other. Began relating ghost stories when his lordship, having recited the beginnings of Christabel, then unpublished, the whole took so strong a hold of Mr. Shelley's mind that he suddenly started up and ran out of the room. The physician and Lord Byron followed, and discovered him leaning against a mantelpiece with cold drops of perspiration trickling down his face. After having given him something to refresh him, upon inquiring into the cause of his alarm, they found that his wild imagination, having pictured him the bosom of one of the ladies with eyes. Now, so that means, if you've ever seen the movie Gothic, with Gabriel Byrne and Emma, oh gosh, what's her name? Oh, not Emma. She passed away. Really beautiful woman. She was married to a Scottish actor. Gabriel Byrne played Byron. Julian Sands played Shelley. And what is her name? Played Mary, and then someone else played Claire Claremont. But they depicted it where basically a woman's bosoms instead of nipples had eyes, because that's what Shelley was saying. He was saying they were definitely on laudanum, according to Mary Shelley's diary. They were definitely imbibing in laudanum. Um, After having given him something to refresh him, upon inquiring into the cause of his alarm, they found that his wild imagination, having pictured to him the bosom of one of the ladies with eyes, which was reported of a lady in the neighborhood where he lived, he was obliged to leave the room in order to destroy that impression. It was afterwards proposed, in the course of the conversation, that each of the company present should write a tale depending upon some supernatural agency, which was undertaken by Lord Byron, the physician, Miss Mary Godwin, who ended up being Mary Shelley, and this is when she wrote Frankenstein. My friend, the lady above referred to, had in her possession the outline of each of these stories. I have obtained them as a great favor, and herewith forward them to you, as I was assured you would feel much curiosity as myself to peruse the debauches of so great a genius, and those immediately under his influence. Excuse me. So basically the letter is setting it up like like it's Lord Byron. And Lord Byron denied ever having written this. It was definitely Polidori. He denied ever having written this, and even said, what was it that Lord Byron said about it? His response was very snarky and very Lord Byron-like, and I love him. Lord Byron. I'm going to Google this real quick, and then I'll go into the first introduction of the Vampyre. And then I'll probably, after I read this, leave it out, and I'll probably come back later in the week, maybe tomorrow. I'll take some time if I've got some time in the evening to read more of it. But let's see what he says here. Because I remember it was quite snarky, and I wish I didn't have to look it up and I could remember it off the top of my head, but it's a lot to remember. I mean, I did study this in college, but let's see. I'm looking. A thinly disguised figure. See, the fragment was a fragment of a novel is what this was basically inspired by, and it is the burial, and that's what it's called, the fragment of the novel, the burial. It's basically the narrator recounting the events that had occurred in a letter. The letter is dated June 17th, 1816, which would have been the day after they had all started writing this, because they all started writing these stories on June 16th, 1816. And it's basically, they both arrive, this man embarks on the grand tour. They both arrive at a Turkish cemetery between Smyrna and Ephesus near the columns of Diana. Near death, Darville reaches a pact with the narrator not to reveal his impending death to anyone. A stork appears in the cemetery with a snake in its mouth. After Darville dies, the narrator is shocked to see that his face turns black and his body rapidly decomposes. Darville is buried in the Turkish cemetery by the narrator. The narrator's reaction was stoical. I was tearless. According to John Polidori, Byron intended to have Darville appear alive again as a vampire, but did not finish the story. Polidori's account of Byron's story in a letter to his publisher indicates it depends for the interest upon the circumstances of two friends leaving England and one dying in Greece and the other finding him alive upon his return, making love to his sister. So Byron did not, I mean, this is one of the things Byron and I do not share in common. Hi, Blues Girl. I'm actually reading the introduction and the first part of The Vampyre by John Polidori, written in 1819, going off on tangents about Lord Byron. So, Byron on vampirism. The vampire superstition is still in general the Levant. Now, the Levant is also the Revenant. It's more of a zombie-like creature. And Rice, it's what Louis and Claudia are looking for when they leave New Orleans in the Interview with the Vampire books. They're looking for a revenant. one like themselves. Well, they're actually looking for ones like themselves, but all they do is find, and this is a direct, I love Anne Rice for this. This is a direct link back to this story and what this story represents, the moving on of vampires from revenants. Um, but the revenant is basically a zombie, and that's all that um, Claudia and Louis find until they find the Theatre du Vampire in Paris. So, um, so Byron says the vampire superstition is still general in the Levant. Honest Tournefort tells a long story about the Varluk. I can never pronounce that. Verlacus, as he calls them. The romantic term is Vardaluca. I recollect the whole family being terrified by the scream of a child, which they imagine must proceed from such a visitation. The Greeks never mention the word without horror. I found that the Brucalikas is an old legitimate Hellenic appellation. The moderns, however, use the word I mentioned. The stories told in Hungary and Greece of these foul feeders are singular, and some of the most incredibly attested. So there is a mention of vampires in the Gower, lines 757 and 768. Now, the Gower is published by Lord Byron in 1813. So there's that. But he has described vampires a little bit. In the 27th of April letter of 1819, however, Byron disclaimed any interest in vampires. I have besides a personal dislike to vampires and the little I have besides a personal dislike to vampires and the little acquaintance I have with them, they would by no means induce me to reveal their secrets. So I like the way that Byron twists it because he's actually saying that they're real, which is pretty cool in his own way, which, of course he would. There's actually a really great book called Lord of the Dead where someone makes Byron into a vampire and his ancestor finds him in a tomb in London in 1992. It's one of my favorite books in the 90s. However, Byron would be regarded as the original or origin for the modern conception of the vampire in literature as a prominent member of society. This goes back to what I was saying. This one goes back to what I was saying about Byron being an enigma, being a pop culture icon, and how he's influenced vampires. And I mean, Lestat is Byron. Come on. Listen to what I'm telling you about Byron. And, um, there's so much of him that is still in the vampire culture, the way it's been written. So Polidori took the lines that he did for this and the fragment and wrote the vampire. Um, and he tried to pass it. I truly believe he tried to pass it off as Byron's work. I fully believe that he wrote this letter. That's my opinion. So let's get into, oh, thank you, Blues. I'm looking at the chat, but I'm also reading, so it's kind of hard for me to do both. So let's get into the vampire. This is actually the text that Polidori wrote. So, the vampire, introduction. The superstition upon which this tale is founded is very general in the East. Among the Arabians, it appears to be common. It did not, however, extend itself to the Greeks until after the establishment of Christianity, which I find very interesting. And that is true. I find it very interesting that that's what brought vampires to the Greeks, but we won't get into the blood of Christ, the body of Christ rising from the dead and all that. That's for another time, but I do find it very interesting. And it has only assumed its present form since the division of the Latin and Greek churches, at which time the idea of becoming prevalent that a Latin body could not corrupt if buried in their territory, which is why this is where the thought that vampires have to take their own earth with them. So basically, there's so much that these writers, put into these stories. And again, a lot of it comes from this book. And it's not even a long story. I'll probably be able to read it to you guys in 2.5 hours, 3, because I keep going off track. And I won't do it all tonight, like I said. But that a Latin body could not be corrupt if buried in their own territory. It gradually increased and formed the subject of many wonderful stories, still extant, of the dead rising from their graves and feeding upon the blood of the young and beautiful. In the West, it spread with some light variation all over Hungary, Poland, Austria, and Lorraine, where the belief existed that vampires nightly imbibed a certain portion of the blood of their victims, who became emaciated, lost their strength, and speedily died of consumption. Now, that's another thing that's really interesting about, and this is an aside, this is my opinion, this from my studies of what I've learned about vampire lore, vampire history, folklore, revenants, all that stuff. It fascinates me that it became also a scapegoat for consumption. Consumption, a body that had been taken by consumption, the idea of consumption, the idea of spitting up blood, the idea of ingesting your own blood, the idea of ingesting someone else's blood, very much ties into consumption. So the fact that consumption as a named disease, as it was basically, consumption had been around forever, but it had just really been a named disease, and people noticing what it was, that it wasn't the plague, that it was something else, that it was something that was attacking people, that it was running in families, which gave the idea that a family member had become a vampire and was coming back and slowly killing these people of their blood, because they were literally bleeding to death from consumption. They were drowning in their own blood, basically. I mean, I don't know if technically they're not bleeding to death, they're drowning in their own blood. And so the whole, right, consumption, tuberculosis, you're right. Yes, that's the actual medical term for it. But back then they called it consumption. So the fact that they were drowning in their own blood, and it went from family member to family member. A lot of people believed a family member would come back and take their family member through vampirism, when really they were dying from consumption or tuberculosis. So, see here. Okay. And died of consumption. While these human bloodsuckers fattened, their veins became distended to such a state of repletion. Sometimes I fumble on words and I'm reading so fast. And their veins became distended to such a state of repletion as to cause the blood to flow from all passages of their bodies, and even from the very pores of their skin. Again, this is another disease that they're blaming on vampirism, maybe a form of the plague. In the London Journal of March 1732 is a curious and, of course, credible account of a particular case of vampirism, which is stated to have occurred at Madragia in Hungary. It appears that upon examination of the commander-in-chief and magistrates of the place, they positively and unanimously affirmed that about 5 years before, a certain Hayduke named Arnold Paul had been heard to say at Kasovia, on the frontiers of the Turkish Servia, he had been tormented by a vampire, but found a way to rid himself of the evil by eating some of the earth out of the vampire's grave and rubbing himself with his blood. Now, that's an interesting little aside. I haven't seen that in any books, but I do find it an interesting tidbit. I'm glad you're finding this interesting, Blues Girl. It's something I'm fascinated with. So I'll just keep going. I could just talk about this. And it's also really fun for me to study this way, because speaking things out loud and telling it like this makes me remember it and find new little things. And I'm working on a vampire book myself, so this is all very helpful to me, because this part right here, I've read this over and over, and I've completely forgot about this particular way of ridding yourself of the vampire tormenting you. You're not killing the vampire this way, but you are making it leave you alone. Eat some of the earth out of the vampire's grave and rubbing himself with the vampire's blood. This precaution, however, did not prevent him from becoming a vampire himself for about 20 or 30 days after. Oh, that's why, because it didn't work. After his burial, many persons complained of having been tormented by him, the Hayduke, and a deposition was made that 4 persons had been deprived of life by his attacks. To prevent further mischief, the inhabitants, having consulted their hadagni, I don't know what that. Let's see, what's a hadagni? That's a chief bailiff. Okay. Um, their chief bailiff took up the body and found, as is supposed to be usual in the case of vampirism, fresh and entirely free from corruption, and emitting at the mouth, nose, and ears pure and florid blood. Proof having thus, I'm glad you're enjoying this, Larry. I know it's very niche to me and my weirdness, but I am what I am. Proof having been thus attained, they resorted to the accustomed remedy. A stake was driven entirely through the heart of the body of Arnold Paul, at which he is reported to have cried out as dreadfully as if he'd been alive. This done, they cut off his head, burnt his body, and threw the ashes in his grave. The same measures were adopted with the corpses of those persons who had previously died from vampirism, lest they should in their turn become agents upon who survived them. Now, this is from 1732. So tales of vampirism obviously have been around forever. I mean, you can go back to the one I find fascinating is the oracles in, I think, is it Odysseus? When Odysseus goes down to Hades, the oracles can only be conscious or answer his questions or actually technically, for lack of a better term, come back to life, come back to consciousness if they feed on the blood of a sheep. So, I mean, vampirism has been around as long as society has. Some form of vampirism has been around as long as society has. It's just evolved to what it is now. And I'm glad, because I don't like zombies. Zombies freak me out. So I'm glad it evolved. Thank you, Polidori. Um, this monstrous, ooh, that's a good word. I've never seen that word before, and I'm pretty well educated. Rhodomontade, it must be foreign. Is here related because it seems better adapted to illustrate the subject of the present observations than any other instance which could be adduced. In many parts of Greece, it is considered as a sort of punishment after death for some heinous crime committed while in existence, that the deceased is not only doomed to vampirism, but compelled to confine his infernal visitations solely to those beings he loved most while upon earth. So this is another interesting thing. Here, if you commit horrible, horrible crimes, you will become a vampire. That's a very interesting piece of lore. A supposition alluded to in the Giaur. I can never pronounce that word. It's a Lord Byron bit of writing that I can never pronounce. And here's a little more of the Giaur. But first on the earth is vampire sent. They course shall fall from its tomb, be rent. Then ghastly haunt the native place, and suck the blood of all thy race. Therefrom thy daughter, sister, wife, at midnight drain the stream of life. Yet loathe the banquet which perforce must feed thy livid living course. Thy victims, ere they yet expire, shall know the demon for their sire. As cursing thee, thou cursing them, thy flowers are withered on the stem. But one that for thy crime must fall, the youngest, best beloved of all, shall bless thee with thy father's name, that word shall wrap thy heart in flame. Yet thou must in thy task and mark his cheek's last tinge, her eyes' last spark, and the last glassy glance must view, which freezes over its lifeless blue. Then with unhallowed hand shall tear the tresses of her yellow hair, of which in life a lock when shorn, affection's fondest pledge was worn, but now is borne away by thee, memorial of thine agony. Yet with thine own best blood shall drip thy gnashing tooth and haggard lip, then stalking to thy sullen grave, go and with ghouls and frits rave, till these in horror shrink away from spectre more accursed than they. So this is to me very interesting because the way I always read it was you commit a heinous crime, you become a vampire, you wipe out your legacy, you wipe out everyone you ever loved, everyone that can carry on your name. So not only are you a fiend and a criminal in life, you end your lineage here. You will end your lineage because, back then, and it's still important to some males today, but back in the day, it was hugely important for the name to carry on. Hugely important. So there's a double threat here. You'll live on blood, you'll be this fiendish demon, and you will kill everyone you love and everyone that can carry on your legacy. So I find that very fascinating as far as the punishment for a crime, vampirism being a punishment for a crime. And, all these things have been played out in other stories, other vampire stories later after Byron. Byron did study this stuff, obviously. And again, Polidori wrote what I'm going to read you, but it is just so important to me to stress how much Byron influenced the appearance, the actions, the feelings of what is a modern vampire. I mean, he's, a lot of people don't even know who Lord Byron is today, but he's still in a huge part of our pop culture. I mean, Edward in Twilight was basically Byron and James Dean and Percy Shelley all rolled into one. Lestat is Byron. That's my opinion on it, and that's all there is to it. you know, so it's I'm so glad that you are both finding this fascinating, because it's something that really obviously I'm passionate about and I'm interested in. And sometimes I think it looks like I just kind of go into drama chats, and I love my drama chats. I love my drama girls and all that, but there's a lot more to me, and I think it's just really fun to be able to share this part of what I love with you guys. So, okay, so that was Lord Byron's piece of poetry about how a bad criminal becomes a vampire and kills his own and wipes out his own name and becomes a demon when he dies. So, back to the introduction to the vampire. Mr. Southey also introduced in his wild but beautiful poem, The Tabala, the vampire corpse of the Arabian maid Onisia, who is represented, oh, I've never read this. I'm going to have to read this. Wow. Who is represented as having returned from the grave for the purpose of tormenting him she best loved while in existence. But this cannot be supposed to have resulted from the sinfulness of her life, she being portrayed throughout the whole of the tale as a complete type of purity and innocence. The voracious Tournefort gives a long account of his travels in several astonishing cases of vampirism, to which he pretends to have been an eyewitness. That's interesting. And Calmet, in his great work upon the subject, besides a variety of antidotes and traditionary narratives illustrates of its effect, has put forth some learned dissertations tending to prove it to be a classical as well as barbarian error. So it seems like, just like vampire stories today, there are many different reasons. And I've never read Thalaba, but I'm going to have to, obviously. So you could just become a vampire for any reason, apparently. It just depends on who's telling the story. Many curious and interesting notices on this singularly horrible superstition might be added, though the present may suffice for the limits of a note, necessarily devoted to explanation, and which may now be concluded by merely remarking that though the term vampire is one of the most general in acceptance, there are several other synonyms with it. I'm about to have to say a mouthful, so I better loosen up my mouth right now. There are several others synonymous with it, made use of in various parts of the world. The Vrukolacha, the Vardolacha, the Ghoul, the Brukolacha, and etc. Now, how these are spelled, so I don't come across as ignorant. The first one is Vrouco, Vrukolacha, Colo, or it could be Lacha, like a loch, Locha. The Vardulacha, Vardoulacha. Ghoul, spelled Goul. The the Brucolaka, spelled Broucolloka. My goodness. Okay, now, any questions? Anybody want to come up on panel and talk to me about what we just discussed? Anybody open for that? Because I'd love to have somebody that loves vampires like I do come on up. I've never had a guest up on my panel. Going once, going twice. Anyone? Okay, so I've been here almost an hour. I will read a little bit of the first bit of the Vampyre, if y'all are interested. Oh, good. Okay, so you're making dinner. I'm gonna have to make dinner. I would love that blues. Okay, so I'm gonna look up something real quick. I don't know if y'all can hear that helicopter. We got one of those Los Angeles helicopters going by. See if my husband has texted me about dinner. And no, he has not. Okay, so now we'll get into the story. And I'll see how far I can go here. The Vampyre by John Polidori, written circa 1816, published circa 1819. This work is in the public domain. It happened that in the midst of dissipations attendant upon a London winter, there appeared at the various parties of the leaders of the ton a nobleman, more remarkable for his singularities than his rank. He gazed upon the mirth around him, as if he could not participate therein. Apparently the light laughter of the fair only attracted his attention, that he might by a look quell it, and throw fear into those breasts where thoughtlessness reigned. Those who felt a sensation of awe could not explain whence it arose. Some attributed it to the dead gray eyes, which, fixing upon the object's face, did not seem to penetrate, and at one glance to pierce through the inward workings of the heart, but fell upon the cheek with a leaden ray that weighed upon the skin it could not pass. His peculiarities caused him to be invited to every house. Now, are y'all seeing, this is an aside, are y'all seeing how this is Byron? I mean, Polidori, this is Byron. There's just no way around it. All wished to see him, and those who had been accustomed to violent excitement and now felt the weight of ennui were pleased at having something in their presence capable of engaging their attention. In spite of the deadly hue of his face, which never gained a warmer tint, either from the blush of modesty or from the strong emotion of passion, though its form and outline were beautiful, many of the female hunters after notoriety attempted to win his attentions and to gain at least some marks of what they might term affection. Y'all, this is Byron. This is Byron, this is Byron, this is Byron. There's just absolutely no way around it. It's very Byronish. So, where were we? Lady Mercer, who had been the mockery of every monster shown in the drawing room since her marriage, threw herself in his way. That's little Carolyn Lamb. Absolutely. Bless her beautiful little heart. And did all but put on the dress of a mountebank to attract his notice. Now, so I'm going to do some asides here because that's just, I mean, I could straight up read it if y'all want me to, but I can also do some asides here to tell you where this is coming from. Before Byron went to Switzerland, he had an affair with a married woman named Lady Carolyn Lamb. Caro Lamb. Beautiful girl. Absolutely. Kind of nuts. She ended up like following after his wagon. It's a long story. After his carriage, and just absolutely threw herself at him, literally. She dressed up as a page, cut off all of her beautiful blonde hair into a page boy, and that was one of the reasons that a lot of women at that point started cutting their hair real short. But that's a different thing about fashion. But she dressed up as a page to sneak into Byron's rooms and get his attention, and she did. And Byron did have some affection for her, more than just about any other woman besides his half sister. That's another story. because he kept going back to her. And his letters, you know, what he would say in public and what he would say to her in letters, he was toxic. But anyway, so this is definitely Carolyn Lamb. Lady Mercer is Carolyn Lamb. Lady Mercer had been the mockery of every monster shown in drawing rooms since her marriage, threw herself in his way, and did all but put on the dress of a mountebank to attract his notice, though in vain. When she stood before him, though his eyes were apparently fixed upon hers, still it seemed as if they were unperceived. Even her unappalled impudence was baffled, and she left the field. She went crazy. That's what she did. But though the common adulteress could not influence even the guidance of his eyes. Now, see, again, Polidori has so much venom for Carolyn Lamb because, you know, Carolyn was crazy. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. He drove her off the deep end. And it's pretty interesting. She was a brilliant writer. She was beautiful. She was, you know, just rich, popular, but she literally made a mockery of herself with the stuff she did for him. I mean, she caused scenes that you would not believe. Well, you would, but back then, people were just like, whoa, what is even going on right now? And Polidori still takes a jab at her by saying, though he did not return the attentions, he did. He slept with her several times. He wrote her letters. You can see in her letters that Byron did care for her in his own Byron way. But though the common adulteress could not influence even the guidance of his eyes, it was not that the female sex was indifferent to him. Yet such was the apparent caution with which he spoke to the virtuous wife and innocent daughter that few knew he ever addressed himself to females. He had, however, the reputation of a winning tongue, and whether it was that it even overcame the dread of his singular character, or that they were moved by his apparent hatred of vice, he was as often among those females who formed the best of their sex from their domestic virtues as among those who sully it by their vices, which I think is probably him talking about, you know, Byron definitely tried to seduce purity. He ended up marrying a very pure, virtuous woman and having Ada Byron Lovelace, who invented the first computing system way back in the day. She was brilliant. You should look her up. So his daughter was brilliant too, his surviving daughter. He had a child with Claire Claremont who died. But his surviving daughter was a genius. So there's that. Yeah, in his own Byron-y way. Yeah, well, you know, I love Byron, y'all. I have a letter he wrote that I bought at an auction. It was not cheap. I've got first editions. I would have hung out with him, maybe slept with him once, but I never would have put up with his stuff. I mean, he was just a mess. And I've never been attracted to bad boys. I'm much more of a Percy Shelley or John Keats kind of girl. I highly recommend the movie Bright Star if you want to read about John Keats and cry your eyes out. It's beautiful. I actually broke down and cried in the room he died in Rome, at the Keats Shelley house on the Spanish Steps. But again, that's another story. I do like Italy. I think Italy's amazing. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So back to the story. About the same time, there came to London a young gentleman of the name of Aubrey. He was an orphan left with only a sister in the possession of great wealth by parents who died while he was yet in childhood. Left also to himself by guardians who thought it their duty to merely take care of his fortune, while they relinquished the more important charge of his mind to the care of mercenary subalterns, he cultivated more his imagination than his judgment. He had hints. I know, I love me. Have you seen Bright Star, Blues Girl? It is beautiful, and it'll make you cry. Oh my God, it'll make you cry. Okay, so where were we? He had hints, that high romantic feeling of honor and candor. I'm pretty sure John Polidori is writing about himself here. Which daily ruins so many milliners' apprentices. He believed all to sympathize with virtue and thought that vice thrown in by or he could be talking about Shelley. I've never really figured out exactly who the main character is supposed to be. I mean, I know that the vampire is Byron, but the protagonist Lord Ruthven is the antagonist. That's Byron, and the protagonist. It's Aubrey, but I'm not sure exactly who it's supposed to be. Um, the thought of that misery of a cottage merely consisted in the vesting of clothes which were as warm, but which were better adapted to the painter's eye by their irregular folds and various colored patches. He thought, in fine, that the dreams of poets were the realities of life. In other words, he was a romantic. He was handsome, frank, and rich. For these reasons, upon his entering into the gay circles, many mothers surrounded him, striving which should describe with the least truth their languishing or romping favorites. The daughters, at the same time, by their brightening countenances when he approached, and by their sparkling eyes when he opened his lips, soon led him into false notions of his talent and merit. I think that also could be the good side of Byron. Um, that's one thing I've kind of debated about this. Um, it, is Lord Ruthven the bad side of Byron, and is Aubrey what Polidori wanted Byron to be, or is Polidori Aubrey, or is Shelley Aubrey? Because he's obviously basing it on somebody. You definitely need to look it up. Definitely blues. Attached as he was to the romance of his solitary hours, he was startled at finding that, except in the tallow and wax candles that flickered, not from the presence of a ghost, but from the want of snuffing, there was no foundation in real life for any of that congeries of pleasing pictures and descriptions contained in those volumes from which he had formed his study. Finding, however, some compensation in his gratified vanity, he was about to relinquish his dreams when the extraordinary being we have above described crossed him in his career. So I'm going to leave it at that for tonight, but I'll talk about it for a few more minutes because I've always found this fascinating who Aubrey is. Part of me wants to believe that that it's the good poetic romanticized version of Byron that a lot of people had before they got to know it, before the vice and the corruption changed him into the vampire. Or is it Polidori feeling the same way? Or is it somebody else? I mean, honestly, the description reminds me of Keats, who I love dearly. Don't get me wrong. Keats was just the romantic of the most romantic of the romantics. I mean, Keats was, oh, bless him. He was just the most romantic, woebegone, emo romantic poet. I love him so much. I love Keats. So, and Byron wrote, and Percy Shelley actually, Keats's tombstone was written. What's on Keats's tombstone is a passage from Shelley that Shelley wrote about Keats in his eulogy. Byron's wife was, she was, I'm going to have to, my brain, you guys, you put me on the spot. I know all this stuff. I don't know. She was an aristocrat. She was one of his female confidants' nieces. She was basically, this older woman was trying to get him away from Carolyn Lamb because she was in love with him, but she knew he might have had her, I mean, I don't know. But she was, she had Ada Countess of Lovelace, but she was an aristocrat. Her father was Sir Ralph Milbank, and Lady Milbank was who introduced her and pushed her towards Byron. She was nicknamed Annabella. She was a mathematician herself. And she was married to him in 1815, and she died in 1860. So she was married to him until he died. And, he, on their wedding night, he basically, I don't think they consummated their wedding for quite a while because he insisted he couldn't sleep in the same bed with her. She had to go sleep somewhere else. He couldn't stand sleeping in the same bed with somebody. So she was married to him in 1815 and separated from him in 1816, but she never got a divorce from him. So they did conceive one child. She basically was Lady Milbank's niece, and Lady Millbank wanted her. She was very virtuous. She was very smart. I mean, Byron did respect her, and that was the thing. That's one of the reasons he left her and didn't abuse her mentally as he did a lot of his mates, because she was very smart. I mean, she was a mathematician. She was well read. She could keep up with him. And, she was a fascinating character all unto herself. Um, I mean, she pronounced him very bad and very good at the same time. And he scoffed. He should like her more if she was less perfect. I mean, she was perfect. Um, Here's a little bit from her biography. The courtship played out entirely on paper. Having requested an informal drawing room wedding, he then steered clear of that room for months. When he finally materialized, he balked. I like them to talk because then they think less. He stumbled over his vows. She left the ceremony in tears. As they headed off to their honeymoon, he informed her that she should have married someone else. The next morning, her ring landed in the fireplace. 3 months into their marriage, miserable and pregnant, she invited an intimate to share their new lodgings. She did not suspect her husband was sleeping with their guest, his half-sister. So she actually brought his half-sister in to try to make their marriage better, and he ended up sleeping with his half-sister. She was headstrong, well-born. Annabella Millbank had been clear about what she wanted in a husband. He should be good-tempered, even-tempered, and attentive. How that added up to Lord Byron, amongst the greatest poets and reprobates of the age, is unclear. So in her last months of pregnancy, Byron wrote off Annabella as a nice little sullen nucleus of concentrated savageness. The letter I have is probably about her. I'll take it out and read it sometime, but I got to put on the gloves and be very careful with it because it is, 200 years old. Even before the onset of labor, she contemplated divorce. The baby's name was Augusta Ada. Yeah, they'll throw the ring in the fireplace bit. Augusta Ada in honor of Byron's sister, the one he slept with. Annabella's closest confidant at the time and lodging with the newlyweds. Ada was just over a month old when her mother left her father. He would never again set eyes on either his wife or his daughter, who would make her name as Ada Lovelace. The poet lived another 8 years, a cloud of scandal scuttling about him. Neither Byron nor his women have lacked for chronicles. The combination of first-rate minds with fourth-rate temperaments is irresistible. Wife and daughter have less often shared a volume. The author of Lives of Mary Shelley and Robert Graves, among many others. So it's in Byron's wake. It's a biography of them if you're interested in it at all, Larry. Annabelle did not necessarily fare better than the poet's widow than she had as his wife. She had her hands full setting the record straight, which would become, as Seymour has it, the occupation and obsession of a lifetime. For Byron's star to rise, hers necessarily dimmed. The pot shots came from all directions. In their absence, she could always count on a malicious relative to darken the doorstep. Then there was that unique parenting riddle. At what age do you tell your precocious child that her father slept with her own aunt? Not early, it seems. Ada was herself married and a mother when Annabella came clean. Ada had intuited as much, but had not known she had a half-sister in Paris. The issue, she choked on the report, of her father's parallel relationship. So supposedly, and it's never really been proven, Byron had a child with his half-sister. So, a new language is a requisite to furnish terms strong enough to express my horror and amazement at the appalling facts she erupted upon finding out this bit of knowledge. The discovery only validated her daredevil instincts and the determination to surpass her celebrated father. Already, Ada was exuberant, indomitable, and boundlessly confident. Afterward, ichor coursed through her veins. So she was brilliant, his daughter. She narrowly avoided public disgrace at 17 when she attempted to elope with a tutor following a session of legitimate sessions intimate sessions in a garden shed. Impetuously ran like class 6 rapids through this family. Yeah, impetuosity, sorry. At 24, having mastered neither algebra nor trigonometry, she begged to throw herself into differential calculus. Okay, this is, not women weren't exactly known for being mathematicians back then. It would be in the horizon catching department that Ada Lovelace left Ada. I pronounce it Ada. While shackled to the past, the young Victorian woman was ahead of her time. In 1834, she began to study with astronomer and mathematician Mary Somerville, who in turn introduced her to some of the best scientific minds of the day. Charles Babbage, then at work at his celebrated calculating engine, figured among them. With the poet's ability to connect disparate dots, Ada grasped that his invention could manipulate vocabularies beyond numbers, something Babbage neither anticipated nor recognized. His was not so much calculating image as a thinking machine, Ada prophetically noted. She devised what some consider to be the first computer program, a work she presented to her proud mother. So, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, it makes Byron was the first pop celebrity. What was going on with these people makes the stuff going on with like Kanye West and Kardashians and all that look tame. He literally was sleeping with his own half sister in his marriage house while his wife was pregnant with his child. Y'all, what do you know about Byron? Am I telling you stuff you don't know or stuff you already know? Am I just preaching to the choir over here, Larry? Is that what you're saying? I'm just preaching to the choir. I hope y'all are finding this interesting because I literally have been just going on and on for over an hour here. But I feel very comfortable talking about this topic. It's something that I'm incredibly well versed and interested in. So that sounded kind of arrogant. I didn't mean to say that I'm smarty pants, but I'm trying to walk downstairs on my gimpy ankle and grab me some food, a snack. I don't know what we're gonna have for dinner. My husband made me steaks last night, so there's that. Come on, St. John. What do you know about Byron, my dear? He probably was appalled at my knowledge and left. Or appalled at my lack thereof. But yeah, I think that if I'm remembering correctly, Annabelle Milbank came from Lady Milbank, who was basically working the devil's deal behind the scenes. She wanted Byron married. She wanted Byron away from Carolyn Lamb. And she wanted Byron in the family. She wanted to have a Byron offspring in her family. So she basically threw her, and she also kind of wanted to rehabilitate Byron's image in a way by marrying him off to the virtuous and beautiful Annabella Milbank. So, I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, oh, has he now? Very interesting. I guess our Larry has a little bit more than we knew going on, So I really hope y'all are finding this interesting. I really do. I mean, it's interesting to me. Oh yeah, I've been to Keats's house in London. I've been to I mean, I give money to help the restoration of Lord Byron's ancestral home. I always say if I win Mega Millions, I'm just going to basically give them all the money they need. I love London and I love Italy. Um, but you've been to New Orleans. So Lord Byron's ancestral home, it was kind of falling around him. It's called Newstead Abbey. And I mean, he was always in want of money because he spent a lot. And it was an abbey, of course. Now, Byron is the one that drank out of a skull. He was an interesting fella. Oh, is it? I'm gonna have to go to that. I've not been to CM Hall, but I've been to Newstead Abbey, which is interesting because I honestly believe that Jane Austen named Northanger Abbey in relation to Newstead Abbey, and I think it's also fascinating when people pause and think that. And I love Jane Austen too. She's another one I've studied quite extensively, and um, I think it's fascinating to me, and I can't remember if she didn't want to meet Byron or Byron didn't want to meet her. But they were writing their stuff at the same time. They were literally living in England at the same time. And so I find that fascinating because you're getting two. Oh, let's go to the luxury spa. Maybe we can conjure up the ghost of Byron. I've also written a short story about the ghost of Byron, which is pretty, basically the gist of it is this girl goes to, and it's actually based on the way I've seen people in the Rudolph Valentino community act. I mean, when I say there's drama everywhere, there's drama everywhere. So in Rudolph Valentino, they always argue over who Valentino would have liked now and what Valentino would have done and what Valentino would have said and what Valentino was feeling and blah de blah de blah de blah de blah. And so I set my short story in a situation where a girl's going to a Lord Byron conference. And she gets there, and all these women are claiming, oh, the ghost of Lord Byron visits me. He doesn't visit you. He visits me. He likes me. Why would he like you? Lord Byron wouldn't like you. I mean, just the whole thing, and she's laughing the whole time. It's a very short story, but she's laughing the whole time. She thinks they're all idiots, and she says as much. And she then, the very end of the story, she gets home and she throws her bags down, and the ghost of Lord Byron sitting in the chair. She's like, you haven't changed a bit. You have not changed a bit. So, yeah, it's just a little short, funny story. Fish and chips. There's a really great fish and chips place down on the Hollywood or Sunset. That sounds good, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get my husband to stop and get me fish and chips because we had steak last night, and so I'm going to guess he's going to want a salad. But Newstead Abbey is absolutely beautiful, and I want it, and I'd like to live there. The Abbey is owned by the Nottingham City Council and houses a museum containing Byron memorabilia. It plays host to weddings and other events, so right? You can go into one of those sweat lodges and sweat off all the calories from the fish and chips. So, so how's everybody doing other than this? How's it going, Blues? How you feeling? Anyone? Have y'all been watching the Johnny Depp trial? Whew, that's some craziness. Yeah, I know. Now I want fish and chips. They closed one of the fish and chips places. Well, it wasn't a fish and chips place. They closed a place near me that had really good fish and chips, had other stuff too, and they put in a mediocre Mexican restaurant, which, isn't that right, Lily? Lily's like, me, my dog, mediocre Mexican doesn't cut it here. There are way too many good Mexican places in this town. There's a place my husband and I go to get mole. Oh, so good. It's just, I think personally, allegedly, my opinion, she targeted him, Blues Girl. I think she targeted him. I think she saw that he had a substance problem. And I mean, everybody pretty much is convinced that Elon Musk is the father of her child. I ain't saying she's a gold digger, and it came out the letter that she sent him, or she was going to get a restraining order, literally said she, well, this is all I'm going to say about it. I've met Johnny a couple of times. I think he's a sweetheart. But that letter came out that we had heard rumors about, but nobody had actually seen. And I think it says it all, where she basically demanded the use of 3 of his penthouses in this building downtown that I love. I think it's called Edison Building. It's absolutely beautiful. It's just a gorgeous Art Deco building. Or is it the Eastern Building? I always get the name mixed up. I think it might be the Eastern. Because before we bought this house, we actually looked at a condo in it. And then my husband and I were just like, oh, no. We want a yard. But yeah, I think she targeted him. But she sent him a letter, and I'm not saying anything out of school. This is out there. It's known now. So I'm not saying anything that, is privileged information. She sent him a letter saying that she needed him to let her and her friends continue using the 3 condos in the Eastern Building. And these condos are huge. I mean, we're talking they're probably like 3,000 square feet each. Because the one my husband and I looked at was 3,200, and it was on the top. It would have actually been on the same floor as his, and you would walk out and look at a pool. You're basically on the pool level. You walk up a little. It's hard to describe. I'm not going to really get too much into it, but and the use of her Range Rover and a whole bunch of money, or she was going to get a restraining order against him. Now, yeah, you should look up the building. It's really beautiful, Blues Girl. It also gives you a little bit of context as to what they're talking about. The Eastern Building. I'm pretty sure it's called the Eastern Building. It's beautiful green building. Art Deco, absolutely gorgeous. The Eastern Columbia Lofts, yeah, and they changed it into lofts or condos. It's downtown. You can let me look it up for y'all. Now I know I mean he doesn't live there anymore. She doesn't live there anymore, so I'm not telling you out of school. But let's see, lofts for sale. If they've got any building features, 7 results. So a 1-bedroom, 1-bath is 1,100 square feet, and it's called the Eastern Columbia Building, and it's 765,000 for a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and it is. You can go on a virtual tour here. It was the inside was a little too modern for me. I mean, we could have done. I just didn't want to live in a condo, honestly. Here, we have a condo, a beautiful condo in New Orleans, but it's different. It's not downtown in a bunch of cement. It's got a big garden. But right now, you can look. There's 7 for sale in the building right now, and yeah, they're not cheap. They're not cheap. They're beautiful if you like that kind of thing. A studio is not cheap. So where could you get one like that one? Where's one of the big ones? Right. So for $3 million, and they weren't quite this much. Well, anyway, for $3 million, you get how many square feet is it? I think it's like 2,800 square foot condo. and that live in one of the most sought after buildings and historic core of downtown. Um, it's known for celebrities like Johnny Depp, blah blah blah. Historic Art Deco building. Um, this one is 2,240 square feet, so it's 2,240 square feet. 3 open bedroom areas, 2 full bathrooms, 2 parking spaces. It doesn't say if it's one of the top one on the top though. It doesn't say which. It's communities. The rooftop has fireplace. No central, but it doesn't say which it is. But anyway, basically, right? Isn't that right, Loose Girl? Let me let me just write out a check. But so he had 3 of these in that building, and he probably didn't pay for them that much at that time because they weren't that much when my husband and I looked. I ended up buying this house instead, but excuse me, she wanted him to continue to pay or continue to let her and her friends live in 3 of those condos and pay her a lot of money and continue to let her use her Range Rover, or she was going to get a restraining order. They put that letter out, I think, yesterday. Now, I totally get wanting to be able to continue to use the car and maybe one of the condominiums. That's completely legitimate for a wife that's leaving somebody with somebody that's got that kind of money, not many houses. But then extortion came into it. And then she wanted more. Why did she need all 3 of them? One house to live in and your car and support. But if he didn't give her an excessive amount of homes and an excessive amount of support, she said right there, if you do, yeah, right, one condo and a car. Right, exactly. But she said if he didn't give her all that other stuff, she was going to have to get a restraining order against him. She didn't want to do that, and she didn't want to make it public. But unless he gave her that stuff, I ain't saying she's a gold digger, but she's got calluses on her hands from shoveling. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm not going to say if she's shoveling shit or gold, but it's one of the two. Yeah. Allegedly, supposedly, for entertainment purposes. Yeah, I mean, Los Angeles is outrageous, but the amount of money people have here is also outrageous. I don't know if y'all heard, um, they've been doing follow home robberies, which is pretty scary. A couple of people have died um, from it. But what they do is they'll go into nice, fancy restaurants and see people with really nice jewelry or handbags or get into fancy cars, and they'll follow them home. And it's a pretty elaborate operation. We're talking 2 carloads of people will follow them home and attack them as they get out of the car and force them into their house to rob them. Um, I live, and I'm not going to say which huge celebrity it is because that'll tell you exactly where I live. And while I trust you and Larry, I don't trust other people listening that aren't typing. But my neighbor on one side of me is he's got a huge compound, very famous person. And then on the other side of me is a not as famous, but I mean, you would know who it was, a very well known musician. And luckily, we have really good security. The famous actor pays for his immediate neighbor's security patrol, and we ourselves have a security patrol. And one of the things that we get with what we pay for, because it's not cheap, what we pay for is if I think I'm being followed home, if my husband thinks he's being followed home, if we feel uncomfortable in any way, we call our security and patrol, and they're fully armed. They're fully guns. It's not tasers. They are fully armed. They will come meet us at our house and walk us into our house. And that's how bad it is around here, as far as these. And we're not, I mean, lots of Volvos around. So we don't drive flashy cars or anything. So we're not necessarily targets, by what we wear, what we drive. Now, my one friend that I love dearly that I hang out with, I love her dearly, but she's flashy AF. I mean, she drives $140,000 BMW, and she carries Hermes bags, and she's obviously been poodle pampered, and I love her dearly, and we get along so well. And people look at us and they're like, "Wow, you're an interesting couple of friends," because I'm always in vintage and very dressed very well, very nicely, but it doesn't look expensive because most people don't understand what they're looking at with vintage, if you know what I mean. And did I cut out? What part of that did you hear? Tell me what the last part that you heard was, because I'm just blabbering on. What was the last thing you heard, Blues? Well, anyway, so luckily for us, our security will escort us home. But I worry. I mean, she's got good security too, but I worry about her sometimes because she's exactly the kind of person that they're targeting. And I mean, sometimes I don't drive right now. I had an incident with low blood pressure where I passed out behind the wheel. So I get someone that drives me around sometimes. And I'll try to get her just to and it's a low key car. I'm just like, can you guys just show up in like a, I don't know, whatever. Oh, so yeah. Anyway, but my friend, she dresses pretty swanky and drives a really expensive car, and we'll go hang out, and I worry that someone's going to follow her home, and hurt her, rob her, because it's gotten bad, y'all. Look up follow home robberies. I mean, everybody kept telling me, "Oh, you must be so scared to be in New Orleans." I'm like, well, have you seen what's going on in LA? So there's that. But anyway, I have talked your ears off. I don't know where my husband is. What time is it? It is 6 o'clock, and he has not called me to tell me where he is or if he's coming home for dinner. Yeah, it's gotten that bad. It's gotten that bad. Like I said, we drive Volvos, and we're not, hugely targeted. Um, and we've got really good security. Yeah, I don't even know about Chicago. I've never even been to Chicago, if as far as I can recall. Maybe my husband was on tour and I went through, but I don't think so. I don't think I've ever been to Chicago. Um, I mean, NOLA definitely is scary in some ways. The carjackings are out of hand. That woman died. They finally decided to charge these juveniles that they kept letting out over and over and over, who killed her, who drug her to death. They drug this poor woman to death. They're going to be charged as adults. So, I mean, it's just different kinds of crime in different areas. The stuff in New Orleans was kind of scary because there was no rhyme or reason to it. They were targeting everybody. They were targeting, they would target crappy cars. They would target nice cars. They would target old people. They would target young people. It didn't, race, religion, age, sex, none of that mattered. None of that matters down there when it comes to carjackings. Here, at least, you can do something to make yourself not as like, you can be low key. You don't have to drive out around in a $150,000 car with your $200,000 handbag and Rolex watch. We get by fine just in our Volvos, and being really low key. Luckily, my husband doesn't want a Rolex. He likes his, what is that watch he's got? He's so excited because it's the one that the astronauts wore on the moon for the moon landing. And he doesn't even wear it all the time. It's beautiful. What is it called? It's an Omega. It's an Omega moonwalk watch or moon landing watch or something like that. And it's from the 60s and it's a beautiful watch, but he doesn't wear it that often. And it's definitely not one that, you know, a random criminal is going to look at and go, ooh, that's an expensive watch. It's very low key. So, you know, it's very low key. So, what are y'all going to, Larry, what are you going to do now? Since you talked about fish and chips, it's probably too late for you to go get fish and chips, huh? Just going to have a salad. I had my cup of tea with 3 lumps of sugar. Larry might be fascinated to know that I drink PG Tips, by the way. It's my favorite tea. Um, I will do more later this week. Tomorrow, I've promised to put up some vintage on my Instagram, so that I'm selling because I got so much vintage and I don't need it all. So, and I posted a reel showing what I was going to sell. So I got to keep my word and put that up. So I might not come back on tomorrow live, but I will try to. And I'll try to, if not, I'll try to come on this weekend. So much love to you all. I appreciate your support. And I'm glad you found it fascinating. I'm really, really, really love the fact that y'all actually sat and listened to me ramble on about something I love so much, a topic that is just so interesting to me, because I know that it's not the usual. I mean, I know it's not crime or drama or, you know, nothing but the best for me, Larry. I love my PG Tips with 3 sugar cubes. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a little hint. This will probably show you more than my um yeah, just look up my Instagram name is my channel name. So I'm a lit freak too. I'm glad you loved it, and I'm a vampire freak. As a matter of fact, I'm probably gonna watch a couple more episodes of the Vampire Diaries. But seriously, 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 look up Bright Star. I can only watch it once. I've got the DVD. It shattered my heart into a million pieces. Oh my God. It's about Keats and his unrequited love and him dying. I got a little bit tipsy because I was in Rome. Look at me, I'm talking again. I was in Rome, ordered a bottle of really nice champagne, and they did their siesta, their afternoon. They're like, sorry, we're closed. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? They gave me an empty orange juice bottle to pour this champagne in, and then they poured some orange juice on the top so I didn't get busted for walking around Rome with alcohol. So me and my friends are chugging it. And then we get to the Keats Shelley house, and the little guy that was working there, he was so sweet. I gave him money for the, gave him a donation. He's like, oh, wow, would you like to sit? And this other girl's like, you didn't let me sit in that room. He's like, yeah, well, I'm going to let her sit in that room. So he literally let me in to the room that John Keats died in to sit down. And y'all, I started bawling like a baby. I was drunk and I was in the room that John Keats died in, and I was bawling like a baby. That's the kind of nerd I am. That's the kind of drunk nerd I am. Bawling like a baby. Because it was only, and it fascinated me too at the same time because, again, I'm rambling. I keep going. I'll really stop after I say this. Because this is something to think about when it comes to time and the mutability of time and space and Einstein's theory of time and the whole 9 yards is The only thing keeping me from Keats, we were in the same space, was this intangible thing called time. It's this intangible thing called time, y'all. Can't touch it, can't taste it, can't see it. But you can overcome it. And you can be in the same space with somebody. But they're not there because of something called time. All right, my loves. I will let you go. I will see you later. I wish you all love and light. And thank you again for your support. And viva la Byron. Bye.